The analysis on data collection from an insight observation by Venerable Rungruan Papa Saro, Dr. Rungruan Lim Chu Patapa. By having an observation on a series of these changing in the states of mind one by one, then we can realize that there is a mind processing, and then we can trace the whole mind processing, and seeing the pattern of the process of dependent origination. And this is the way to have a perfect insight observation in the Buddhist practice, to see exactly the same thing that Buddha saw on the day of his enlightenment. In an insight observation of the four mindfulness foundations, we use a purified mindfulness to observe the mind processing by detecting the reality of the object of consciousness, like setting up signal processing sensors to monitor on what is happening at the body as an input of system, the feeling as an output of system, the mind as an operating of system, to have a whole picture of the Dharma in this study. In the last session of the Four Mindfulness Foundations, the Buddha introduced the application of the Four Noble Truths analysis on the observed data for wisdom development at the end of Sutta, and in one occasion the Buddha elaborated on how to make a direct learning experience from an insight observation in details, which is called the principle of the investigation of the seven foundations of investigations on a particular arising phenomenon, and then describing the three aspects of insight. Investigations of the whole system of mind, that is, during performing an insight observation, at the moment when a phenomenon arises, then have a mindfulness with careful attention to investigate the particular phenomenon as follows. During performing an insight observation, one can realize a stream of consciousness in such a way that every time when having a consciousness, there is an arising object of consciousness in related with the five aggregates of being. At every instant of seeing a mental phenomenon, then having an insight investigation on the object of consciousness in seven aspects of considerations on an individual phenomenon step by step as follows. 1. During performing an insight observation, then making an investigation on a particular mental phenomenon, we can see that there is a phenomenon arises within the mind. 2. And also can see that after a short while, that particular phenomenon fades away. Then a new phenomenon arises, and then fading away in nature. Note, as the mind is processing signals throughout the central nervous system, there are varieties mental phenomena happening during the observation. These phenomena are in fact the varieties of arising objects of consciousness in relation to the five aggregates of being. This part of an observation reveals a fact that each particular phenomenon arises and fades away in nature, so we can conclude that every phenomenon is impermanent. Whatsoever happening losses for a short while before vanishing, so every phenomenon is deteriorating. 3. Now during making a careful observation on the particular arising of object of consciousness, then making an investigation to understand what the cause of the arising phenomenon is. 4. And during making a careful observation on the particular object of consciousness when it fades away, then making an investigation to understand what the cause of the fading phenomenon is. This observation reveals the fact that dependent on one phenomenon, then another phenomenon arises. Note, this part of investigation is to conduct a cause analysis on a phenomenon to reveal a fact that each particular phenomenon arises dependently on the previous phenomenon, and each phenomenon fades away as a part of nature. And if we trace these arising phenomena consecutively, we can realize that a stream of these phenomena is a mind processing functioning in a central nervous system. Therefore, every phenomenon is no self. The main objective of performing an insight observation is to see what is happening inside an inner mind as what it really is. In seeing an individual object of consciousness arises and fades away, while the mind changes from one state to another state by a certain cause and effect, then we can contemplate that each of these phenomena is impermanent, deteriorating, and no self. As a matter of fact, every object of consciousness that arise, then they will fade away in nature. However, what we keep on thinking on something, This is because the mind keeps on generating a new object of consciousness in relation to that matter inside the mind processing at all times. This new generated object of consciousness will be mixed with memory from latent dispositions in the volitional formations in thinking. 5. In parallel to having a cause analysis, in steps 3 and 4, also making an effect analysis on the arising phenomenon, to determine whether there is any beneficial effect of this phenomenon. That is, the wholesome phenomenon will make the mind to become internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. The wholesome mind is beneficial to life. 6. Also looking for whether there is any harm of the phenomenon. That is, the unwholesome phenomenon will make the mind to become disturbing, struggling, burning, and irritating, and unconcentrated. The unwholesome mind, such as the mind with greed, hatred, delusion, or the mind with lower fetters in unwholesome thoughts, and even the troubling mind at craving, clinging, and ignorance in the process of dependent origination, all of them are harmful to life. This observation reveals the fact that the mind becomes wholesome or unwholesome depends on how the mind internally responds to arising object of consciousness rightly. Note, this part of investigation is to conduct an effect analysis on a phenomenon to reveal the condition of arising phenomenon whether it is wholesome or unwholesome. When the mind is wholesomeness, then the mind becomes internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated, and on the contrary when the mind is unwholesome, then the mind becomes internally struggling, unsteadied and unconcentrated. As a matter of fact, there is no self to be wholesome or unwholesome, but whatsoever happening is due to the law of cause and effect in nature. And since the mind has a special cognitive capability on learning from an insight observation starting from having a mindfulness to abandon an arising unwholesome state of mind, then gaining a knowledge of the cause and effect in terms of pattern recognition for the destruction of the taints. 7. And then the mind will gain the insight wisdom of instructed cognition on how to liberate the mind. It is necessity to liberate the mind whenever the mind is struggling with greed, hatred, delusion, or the mind with lower fetters in unwholesome thoughts, and even the troubling mind at craving, clinging, and ignorance in the process of dependent origination. Clearly by understanding the fact that there is no existence of a self in the reality of being as for an inside housing for the 5 aggregates subject to clinging anymore, and in this circumstance, when the arising object of consciousness fades away, by then, the mind will have nothing to be relied on, and to be based on, and as a result there will be no renewal of the object of consciousness within the volitional formations, and then the process of dependent origination is terminated. And the mind is liberated by wisdom. Note, by having the functional analysis on each particular phenomenon, we contemplate on the cause and effect of each particular phenomenon, and then realizing that it is sort of a dependently mind processing. And eventually having a clear understanding on how to liberate the mind by wisdom. That is, when an arising phenomenon fades away by nature, and if we do not cling to the existence of the 5 aggregates, then the mind will not renew an internal object of consciousness anymore, and this is how the mind can be liberated by wisdom. In the threefold study strategy, we study on the morality to abandon the rough defilements with greed, hatred, and delusion. We study on the mind during performing the Buddhist practice to abandon the lower fetters of the middle defilements. And finally, after gaining wisdom, then we use this wisdom for the cessations of craving, clinging, and ignorance, and then all the taints are destructed by wisdom. This is the completion of mind liberation by wisdom in Buddhism.
After the completion of the fully investigations on each particular mental phenomenon in the 7 foundations, then extending the investigation into the mind processing as a whole system in 3 aspects of considerations as follows. 1. Considering everything in the world as just an element in nature. That is, everything already exists in nature as it is. There is no self that creates or owns these mental phenomena. In particularly, the mind is a natural process that is caused by certain cause and effect in nature, then realizing that life is no self.
Note, the notion of element in Buddhism implies that everything and all phenomena already exist in nature. The nature is a creator of everything in terms of name and form. A being consists of 5 aggregates, and a form is composed of 4 elements, and a feeling is a feeling element, a perception is a perception element, a volitional formation is a formation element, and a consciousness is a consciousness element. Each part of the process of dependent of origination is an element. All in all, every elements in nature are impermanent, deteriorating, and no self. The law of cause and effect also is a law of nature of which every elements are caused by certain condition in nature. Each part of the process of dependent origination, and each component of the 5 aggregates dependently arise by certain cause and effect in nature. What we may feel happy or pain is caused by certain condition. And by knowing that it is beneficial or harmful to life, then if we keep on tracing on the cause of an arising phenomenon, then we can find the origin of it. This is way to determine on how to liberate the mind from any problem and suffering. Understanding the nature of element of life is a basis of the 7 aspects of considerations on the study of each individual phenomenon.
2. Observing that a mind is a natural process starting at the 6 sense bases, and by realizing the truth that a mind is simply a natural process, and then the mind is really no self.
Note, the mind starts a mind processing at the 6 sense bases with sensing consciousness, therefore the 6 sense bases are the starting points of the mind processing. This investigation will lead to a discovery of the process of dependent origination.
3. By making an inside observation throughout the whole process of the dependent origination, starting from the 6 sense bases, contact, sensation and feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, birth, decay and death, ignorance, volitional formations, consciousness, name and form, and internally reflowing in 6 sense bases, in their direct and inverse relations in progressive and regressive evolution. And as long as we still keep on having a study on these 3 related subjects of the truths of life, including the study on the element, these are the truths of nature, especially the realization that a life is a part of nature. The study on the 6 sense bases, these are the truths of nature about how life interfaces with the world through the 6 sense bases. And the study on the process of dependent origination, these are the truths of life as natural processing of dependent origination. Then the Buddhism will last forever, and the Buddhism will never come to an end. The studies of the 3 subjects can be concluded as the truths of life within nature.
The Buddha explained that after reviewing on all of phenomena in terms of mind processing, then we could realize that each parts of the mind processing was just an element of natural phenomenon starting with the 6 sense bases, and then proceeding in a pattern of the process of dependent origination, and then by applying the 4 Noble Truth analysis on this insight observation, then we could conclude that a life is a natural process of being, and it is no self. This is insight wisdom development by performing the 4 mindfulness foundations, then applying these 7 foundations of considerations for the cessations of all deferments within the mind. In this sutta, the Buddha highlighted an investigation of an insight observation into 2 parts. A function analysis on each phenomenon in 4 areas, a behavioral analysis of the arising and fading away of each phenomenon, a cause analysis of the arising and fading away of each phenomenon, an effect analysis of the impact of each phenomenon, and a liberation analysis to figure out on how to liberate the mind. A structural analysis on collective observations of all phenomena of the mind as elements of the whole system of the 5 aggregates of being. The mind is simply a mind processing starting from 6 sense bases in the formation of the process of dependent origination. Seeing an individual phenomenon inside the mind is essential, and by having a good understanding of the cause and effect of the arising and fading away of the individual phenomenon is exponentially much more significant, than when connecting all of each phenomenon as a whole system of mind processing in the process of dependent origination, then we can realize the overall vision of life. It is apparent that the Buddha never predicted that when the Buddhism will disappear from the world, or when the world will come to an end. The Buddhism will be prosper or destroyed depending on the condition of the study in searching for the truths of life within nature or not. As long as there are people study on the element that everything is just a part of nature, and a life is just a mind processing starting from 6 sense bases in a series of the process of dependent origination, then people will understand the Buddha's teachings. The Buddhism is based on facts and science, and as long as people still search for the facts of life by studying on science, then the Buddhism will last forever, no matter what it may be called in any name and form. Performing the Buddhist practice is like teaching children on what is right or wrong. The mind is just like a toddler learning on how to walk. It is a learning experiencing of cognitive process of mind. In principle, it is impossible to force the mind to do whatsoever as we used to believe in the past, but it is the knowledge of knowing the law of cause and effect of what is really right or wrong in accord to the 7 foundations and the 3 aspects of considerations of a life as a whole system during performing an insight observation, and then applying this knowledge to correct the dysfunction of the mind processing in the process of dependent origination, and this is the Buddhist way to liberate the mind and to make an end of suffering in life. It is very important to realize that in performing the Buddhist practice, it is not just forcing the mind to be calm for a while because the mind is no self, and the only way to develop the quality of mind is by having a systematic studying on the truths of mind in insight observation to gain wisdom on the truths of life within nature, so that we can use these knowledge for the destructions of all defilements in the mind.